The most dangerous man in the city installed hidden cameras expecting to catch a thief. Instead, he caught something that would transform his soul forever. There, kneeling before his blind daughter, the quiet maid was teaching the little girl to see, and unknowingly teaching him to love. Welcome to our channel Truth Turn Stories, where real-life truths turn into powerful lessons. If this story speaks to you, subscribe and support the journey. The surveillance monitor flickered to life in the darkened study, and what Marco Valentino witnessed in the next 47 minutes would shatter everything he thought he knew about power, loyalty, and love. There, in the soft afternoon light streaming through his daughter's bedroom window, knelt a woman he had barely noticed in 3 months of employment. A quiet, unassuming maid named Elena, holding his blind daughter's hands and teaching her to see the world in ways he never imagined possible. His heart, hardened by decades of violence and betrayal, suddenly felt like cracked glass ready to shatter. Marco Valentino was not a man who trusted easily. At 52 years old, he commanded one of the most powerful crime families on the eastern seaboard, a position earned through ruthlessness, strategic brilliance, and an iron heart that showed mercy to no one. His 17-room mansion in the hills outside Philadelphia stood as a fortress, staffed by 32 employees who understood that their employer's business was never to be questioned, and his privacy was sacred. But despite his immense wealth and terrifying reputation, Marco carried a wound that no amount of money or power could heal. His daughter, 7-year-old Isabella, had been born completely blind, and her mother, Marco's beloved wife Sophia, had died from complications during childbirth. For 7 years, Marco had watched helplessly as Isabella navigated a dark world, hiring the finest tutors, the most expensive specialists, the most recommended caregivers. Yet something always seemed missing. Isabella remained withdrawn, rarely smiled, and often sat alone in her room, her tiny fingers tracing patterns on her bedspread while the world moved on without her. Marco loved his daughter with a ferocity that surprised even him, but he had no idea how to reach her, how to bridge the gap between his violent world and her silent one. Elena Moreno had arrived at the Valentino estate 3 months earlier, a 43-year-old widow with calloused hands and gentle eyes that seemed to hold both sorrow and quiet strength. Her employment interview had been brief. She needed work, her references checked out, and the head housekeeper needed additional help with the East Wing. Marco hadn't even been present for the hiring. Such matters were beneath his attention. Elena was assigned to cleaning duties, invisible among the army of staff members who kept the mansion running like a well-oiled machine. She spoke little, worked diligently, and caused no trouble. To Marco, she was merely another face among many, unremarkable and easily forgotten. But what Marco didn't know, what no one in the household knew, was that Elena had spent 18 years as a special education teacher at a school for blind children in Puerto Rico, before her husband's death had forced her to relocate to the mainland and take whatever work she could find. She had watched Isabella from afar during her first weeks of employment, noticing how the other staff members treated the child with awkward pity or uncomfortable avoidance, speaking about her in hushed tones as if blindness were contagious. Something in Elena's heart had stirred, a calling she thought she had left behind, and slowly, carefully, she began finding reasons to be near Isabella's room. The situation that led to Marco's surveillance had begun with suspicion. His head of security, a sharp-eyed former military operative named Vincent, had reported unusual patterns in the household. The new maid was spending significant time in the East Wing, specifically near Isabella's quarters, far beyond what her cleaning duties required. In Marco's world, unusual behavior always meant danger. Paranoia had kept him alive when others had died, and he immediately ordered hidden cameras installed throughout Isabella's rooms. He expected to uncover theft, perhaps, or his blood ran cold at the thought. some plot against his daughter, orchestrated by rival families who knew that Isabella was his only weakness. What he discovered instead left him utterly unprepared. The footage began innocently enough. Elena entered Isabella's room with her cleaning supplies, but instead of immediately beginning her work, she approached the little girl who sat motionless by the window. Marco watched Elena kneel beside his daughter and speak softly, asking permission before taking Isabella's small hand. Then, something remarkable unfolded. Elena placed a flower in Isabella's palm, a rose from the garden, and began describing it not just by sight, but by texture, by scent, by the way the petals curved like tiny cups meant to hold morning dew. She guided Isabella's fingers along the stem, warning her gently about the thorns, explaining that beautiful things sometimes needed protection too. Isabella's face, usually so blank and distant, began to transform. Her brow furrowed with concentration, then curiosity, then something Marco hadn't seen in years, wonder. Marco leaned closer to the monitor, his coffee growing cold beside him, as Elena produced more objects from a small bag she had hidden behind the cleaning cart. A seashell that sang with the memory of ocean waves, a piece of velvet that felt like a kitten's ear, a small wooden bird carved with intricate detail that Isabella explored with increasingly confident fingers. Elena was teaching his daughter to see with her hands, to experience a world that others experienced with their eyes, and she was doing it with a patience and love that Marco had never witnessed from any of the expensive specialists he had hired. Over the following days, Marco became obsessed with the surveillance footage, watching hours of recordings when he should have been attending to business, matters that demanded his attention. He watched Elena teach Isabella to identify sounds, the difference between a sparrow and a cardinal, the way rain sounded on glass versus on leaves, the rhythm of footsteps that could tell you if someone was happy or sad. He watched Elena bring textures for Isabella to explore, silk and sandpaper, feathers and stones, warm bread fresh from the kitchen, and ice cubes that made Isabella giggle as they melted in her palms. But what struck Marco most deeply was not the teaching itself. It was the way Elena spoke to his daughter. She never used pity in her voice. She never spoke down to Isabella or treated her as broken or limited. Instead, Elena spoke to Isabella as if she possessed a special gift, a unique way of experiencing the world that sighted people could never fully understand. "You feel things we can't," Elena told Isabella one afternoon, and Marco watched his daughter sit up straighter, her chin lifting with unfamiliar pride. "Your fingers know secrets that eyes can never learn. When you touch someone's face, you feel their story. When you hold someone's hand, you feel their heart beating. That is magic, mi pequeña. Never forget that." The transformation in Isabella was undeniable. Where once she had moved through the mansion like a ghost, shuffling with uncertainty, she now walked with growing confidence. She began asking questions about everything around her, wanting to touch the paintings on the walls, curious about the texture of her father's leather chair, fascinated by the gravel crunch of the driveway under her feet. The household staff noticed the change with puzzled amazement, whispering among themselves about the little girl who had suddenly come alive. But Marco noticed something else in the footage that shattered the last remnants of his hardened heart. He noticed the way Elena loved his daughter, genuinely, selflessly, expecting nothing in return. He watched Elena stay late, after her shift ended, sitting with Isabella when nightmares came. He watched Elena sacrifice her lunch breaks to prepare special sensory activities. He watched Elena speak about Isabella's mother with tenderness, gathering information from other staff members so she could tell Isabella stories about Sofia, how she had smelled of jasmine perfume, how her laugh had sounded like music, how she had knitted a tiny blanket for Isabella before she was born that still lay folded in a cedar chest. Marco watched his daughter cry for the first time about her mother, healthy tears of grief and connection, while Elena held her and whispered that it was beautiful to miss someone so deeply because it meant love never died. The revelation hit Marco like a physical blow. For 7 years he had tried to buy his daughter happiness, hiring experts and acquiring every adaptive technology money could purchase. But what Isabella had needed, what she had been starving for, was not expertise or equipment. She needed someone to see her, truly see her, not as a blind child to be pitied or a problem to be solved, but as a complete human being with gifts to offer and a heart hungry for connection. Elena, a humble maid earning barely enough to afford her small apartment, had given Isabella something that Marco's millions could never buy. She had given his daughter her sight back, not the physical kind, but something far more precious. She had shown Isabella how to see herself as worthy, as capable, as magical. Marco sat in his study for a long time after watching the final recording, his hands pressed against his eyes, his shoulders shaking with emotions he had buried for decades. He thought about his own childhood, raised by a violent father who taught him that softness was weakness and kindness was foolishness. He thought about the man he had become, feared by thousands, loved by no one except a little girl who couldn't even see his face. He thought about Sophia, who had begged him before her death to raise Isabella with gentleness, with love, with openness to the world's beauty. He had failed that promise until now. The next morning, Marco did something that shocked his entire household. He requested a private meeting with Elena, not through his staff, but by approaching her himself as she cleaned the main hallway. Elena's face went pale with terror, her hands trembling as she set down her supplies, clearly expecting to be accused of wrongdoing. Instead, Marco did something he hadn't done in 30 years. He bowed his head to another person, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke. "I know what you have been doing for my daughter," he said quietly. "I saw everything on the cameras. I need you to understand something. You have given Isabella more in 3 months than everyone else in this house, including me, has given her in 7 years. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know if I deserve to thank you, given what I am and what I do. But I am asking you, I am begging you, to stay, not as a maid, as Isabella's companion, her teacher, her family. Name your salary, name your conditions, just please stay." Elena's eyes filled with tears as she looked at this powerful, dangerous man reduced to humble pleading by love for his child. She thought about her own daughter, lost to illness 5 years earlier, and how she had prayed for purpose after that devastating grief. She understood now that every tragedy in her life, every twist of fate, had led her here, to this mansion, to this child, to this moment of grace. "I don't want your money," Elena said softly. "I only want your promise. Promise me you will learn to see your daughter the way I see her. Promise me you will sit with her, touch her world, listen to her heart. She doesn't need things, Mr. Valentino. She needs you." In the months that followed, something miraculous unfolded in the Valentino household. Marco began spending hours each evening with Isabella, guided by Elena's gentle teaching. He learned to describe sunsets with words that painted pictures in his daughter's mind. He learned to read her bedtime stories with different voices that made her laugh. He learned that holding her hand while walking through the garden meant more than any toy he could buy. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, then undeniably, Marco began to change. The man who had built an empire on fear discovered something more powerful, the quiet strength of tenderness. The man who had trusted no one found himself opening his heart to a humble maid who had taught him the greatest lesson of his life. Kindness, Elena had shown him, was not weakness. It was the most courageous choice anyone could make in a harsh world. True power was not making others bow. It was having the strength to bow yourself when love demanded it. And sight, real sight, had nothing to do with eyes. It lived in the heart that chose to truly see the worth and beauty in every human soul.